Okay, so welcome to the Sri Lankan Azure DevOps Meetup. And today I'm going to be speaking about the Azure Security Benchmark. My name is Marlin Disibla and I'm a MVP for Microsoft Azure and currently working for Capgemini Netherlands as senior consultant. And I have a bit of experience on Azure since like 2016. Right. So we'll start with this. I mean, it's an interesting topic. When you speak about security, there are quite a lot of ways that you can secure something on Azure. Uh, Now, the problem is, although there are many options, we don't know which one to pick when. So it's a bit of unclear territory for anyone who is going to start on Azure, and it can be really tricky when it comes to some standardization that your organization might need. Okay, so how are we going to secure this thing, and what's the mechanism going forward? So there are plenty of questions about security that comes on, so we have to figure it out it ourselves, or just follow the documentation that Microsoft has provided. So Azure Security Benchmark comes into this. And before moving much further about Azure Security Benchmark, let me speak a little about the way how you can secure certain things on Azure. So to start with, we have the most primary and the common one that you can start with, the username and password, which existed for years, I guess, and it has been a common thing. It still exists, but the challenge with the username and password is you have to maintain quite a lot of passwords if you have to go and do certain things. Yes, at the outer level for use accounts, you can use it the username and password, but when it comes to the connected services, it will be a big challenge because there will be environments and so many configurations that you have to manage, and you have to provision separate services to keep it secure, which will be challenging. So but still it remains most of the time the primary way of securing, which can be either a password or a certificate that you can present. So secure certificate has some sort of encryption in it, and that key validates against the issuer that you can use for securing the resources within Azure. And the third one is subscription keys. That's a very basic one. It's not the most secure one, and it's very much recommended not to use it that well. But if you look at some sort of a instance like a API subscription, different users can generate their subscription keys, and that subscription key is more of allowing the user to all the services to map and track how things are working, and how much traffic it's generating, and how the users are maintaining certain things. So it's logging wise, it's a very useful feature to have subscription keys, and it's being very frequently used. Now, if you look at something like API management, you will definitely need to use a subscription key, and that subscription key will allow to you to track and do certain things with it. It won't itself make the API secure if you look at it, because you need some sort of other validations, either IP restrictions or JWT token validations. But a subscription key allows that some sort of a limitation is there, and it makes it easy to track. Now, if you look at something like a single page application, you will have to send the subscription key on plain text, and the key rotation is rotation can be done depending on how the requests and responses are generating there. So it's an option, but it's not the recommended, and the option is sort of a partially essential component to most of the some of the services on Azure. And then we have the option of multi-factor authentication that allows you to either send a code to your email address or mobile address, or use the authenticator app on for logging in. And that's something that you can secure your AD use accounts, but it's not really something that allows to secure something on resources on Azure. And then the Azure ADSS, so you can create applications on Azure, app registrations on Azure AD, and then you can create registrations on Azure AD B2C, and then you can allow single sign-on, so the users do not need to keep entering their passwords or manage different passwords. It's a single sign-on, it's secured, and there are plenty of standards that Microsoft is adhering when they are doing things. And then we have the virtual networks. What virtual networks allow you to do is you can restrict the access to external public internet by having virtual networks and securing them inside the NSGs, like. And so most of the resource, now if you look at a normal traditional application, let's assume we have a web front end and an API application and a database, and you only need to expose your web application to the outside. So in such situations, we can set up virtual networks and allow the traffic between different subnets to have a relationship, like the web app can only communicate with the API app, and the API app can only communicate with the database app within those subnets. So virtual networks, how it does it is not exposing anything to internet, so it will remain inside the that particular virtual network itself. And then there's an option for private endpoints. Of course, when you are creating a private endpoint, you need to have a subnet inside it. What it does is it's again stopping the resources being exposed to public IP. So rather than connecting to internet, it's connecting via the Microsoft backbone, and within the Microsoft data centers it will be connecting inside, so you don't need to actually have much security worries there, because it's not connected to the internet. For example, the databases can be exposed to the API apps via private endpoints. And lastly, in terms of the identity management, we have the managed identity option. So basically, managed identities have system assigned managed identities and user assigned managed identities. What it does is you don't need to maintain quite a lot of keys as configuration. Rather than that, you will say, okay, I need to access this resource in this particular area, and then you create a trust within these two resources, and then Azure will ensure that this resource can access this resource via a managed identity. So a managed identity is ultimately a user principal created on Azure AD, and that allows them to stay secure there within inside. So moving to next, we have few security standards when you are using the IT systems and so on, and the key ones that are available here are the Center of Internet Security, which is a non-profit organization founded in 2000, and they are a team who are doing all this developing, validating, and promoting best practices that people and business and governments can use and secure their resources for cyber threats. So it has a set of standards, and those standards are well used in many organizations, especially if you are in the financial sector and so on. And then the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a non-regulatory agency in the United States Department of Commerce, and it's trying to. I mean, these standards are also used in many different situations depending on the organization you're working on. And when it comes to the payment card industry, PCI-DSS are the standards that are used highly, and the payment card industry security standard is information security standard for organizations that handle the credit cards and debit cards and those information. So you have to adhere to them in order to make sure that you are secure within your subscription and so on. All right, so before going to the further sites, I will show some websites that are in there. uh, So CIS controls, now it's in the version 8. If you go to CIS controls, you can download this one by going to the CIS Center of Internet Security site and getting sign up with them. So if we go through this, we have a set of inventory and control enterprise assets, software assets, data protection, account management, access control, continuous vulnerability management, and so on. So that's a very detailed documentation. What are the procedures and tools that you can use, and how you can ensure that those are applicable, right? And then we have this PCI Security Standards Council. They have their own security guidelines you can follow in the PCI-DSS. And then the National Institute of NIST, they have their standards as well. This is just the website of the organization. But inside this, you will find all the uh, standards that are mentioned in, right? So if you look at the Azure Security Benchmark, it's something interesting. I mean, it's very simplified the way how they have organized all these resources out there, because it's coming around with two concepts that you can easily follow up when you are following the security benchmark. Now you might think that okay, this is very difficult. You can have to have a separate uh, time to look at it and study it, but it's not. It's very simple. But the component that are mentioned inside are very in detail, so it makes it very interactive and easy to use. So first to start, there are security controls, and then they have the recommendations applicable across tenants and Azure services, and each recommendation includes a list of stakeholders involved planning, approval, or implementation of the benchmark. And then the service baselines are there, so each individual Azure service that is out there can be secured using one of these service baselines. And what's really informative here is all these are mapped to a certain resource. We can see it in the demonstration. Yeah. So how do you implement the Azure Security Benchmark? So Microsoft recommends first thing is that they have have to plan it and map with the guidelines. As I earlier said, the Center of Internet Security, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards are the three common organizations that I use. But there are more standards that might come in if you are working on a certain country, and they might have their own local regulations. And they also can be found in the Microsoft Compliance Center if you go to it. Yeah. So Microsoft Compliance Center has all these guidelines. If you go to documentation, you can see different compliance offerings like global one, CIS benchmarks, and the ISO standards, and the US government specific one, and what are related to the financial services, and then the APAC region, Asia Pacific region related standards, and different standards according to the region. So all these compliance within the Azure Security Center are available here. For example, if you go to PCI-DSS, you can have a really big understanding on what are they, basically an overview, and how the PCI-DSS is managed, and which Azure types are applicable here, and the services in scope, and how the audit records, and a few frequently asked questions. So one thing that you have to keep in mind is you adhering to these doesn't by default get you the standard validation. You will have to explicitly get it, but Azure allows you to understand what are the things you need to do in order to be compliant with these organization standards. And then you can monitor this with Microsoft Defender for Cloud Regulatory Compliance Dashboard, and then you can establish these practices in the Azure blueprints and Azure policies. So what is Azure Blueprint? Now Azure Blueprint is something that you can set up. Now earlier, back in the days, we used to have quite a lot of big ARM templates that we could use, but using more and more ARM templates, and now even Bicep, makes it a little bit complicated for the organizations to handle multiple large ones. So how we can do it is we can create a blueprint that will have a particular ARM template, one or more, and then also after that you can allow different policies to each of the blueprints within that policy. So that way you can easily manage how you do it. And then the components of the Azure Security Benchmark. Now it's in version 3. It has evolved over the years, and mainly the Cloud Adoption Framework is there, and the Azure Well Architect Framework, and Microsoft Security Best Practices, and the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. Now, before we going into detail, let's go to the Azure Security Benchmark and see how we can use it. Okay, so earlier, as I said, we have the security controls. If we go to the Azure Security Benchmark, it's easy. You can find it on the documentations in the DevOps Security Benchmark, and it has the this overview of the layout. What are the available security controls, and then the security baselines for Azure are here as well. So you can use them as well. And if you go to security controls section, you can see that there are different control domains like network security, identity management, privileged access, data protection, asset management, login and threat detection, incident response, and so on. So it's very in detail what are the controls are mapping in here. Now, if you look at going to the network security, now we can, one thing that we need to notify is that there's a tag here like NS1, right? So NS1 is about establishing network segmentation boundaries, right? And here below it has each of the security standards that are applicable for this segment. Now, if you look at it, CIS controls V8 has 3.12, 13.4, and 4.4. NIST has its own set of IDs mapping, and PCI-DSS has its all IDs mapping. And if you look at this, we have NS1 and then NS2, secure cloud services with network controls, and all the IDs are here as well. So you can go inside and see like something like security principles, secure cloud services by establishing private access points for resources. You should also disable and restrict access from public networks when possible. And then the Azure guidance is there, deploy private endpoints. As I earlier said, private endpoints are connecting via the Microsoft backbone. So deploy private endpoints for all Azure resources that support private link feature to establish private access point for the resources, right? And you should also disable and restrict public network access to services where feasible. Now, as I said, for databases, you don't need it. You can block access from public networks. If you need, you can allow browse to Azure portal or within a VM inside that VNet itself. And then for certain services, you also have option to deploy VNet integration for the service, where you can restrict the VNet to establish a private access point for service, right? So these are there, and then the custom security holders, stakeholders, all these information are here. So that's network security. And if we go to identity management, you can see there's a list of guidelines here like IAM1, IAM2, IAM9. And what it does is use centralized identity and authentication system. We'll start with this. You can see all the value mapping CIS controls are there, and the NIST controls and PCI-DSS are here. And then what it says is it's use the security principle, use a centralized identity and authentication system to govern your organization's identities and authentications for cloud and non-cloud resources. And its guidance is used to Azure Active Directory, and you should standardize on Azure AD to govern your organization's identity and authentication. And if you go further, you can see Microsoft Cloud resources such as storage, VMs, and Key Vault, and these are can be used for that as well. And then you get some additional context that you can use, tenancy and so on, and other options to have. So likewise, if you go to DevOps section, you have this uh, set of guidelines, DS1 to DS7, and you can see down here one of the simplest ones would be enable logging and monitoring in DevOps. So the CIS controls, NIST controls, PCI-DSS, and the guidance out here. So likewise, these segments, I think there are about 12 here, and all these allow you to have a detailed overview of what you should be doing, right? And if you look at these components, you can look at the cloud adoption framework. Now, cloud adoption framework is mainly used when you are coming to Azure, or when you have come to Azure, or we are in progress of migrating to Azure, and you need to adapt to that cloud, how you do it and what are the stages. There are like 6 stages: plan, deploy, and so on. So you can do a cloud adoption assessment and then evaluate where you need to improve. And then the Azure Well Architect framework and the other frameworks are also there. And the version 3 of the Azure Security Benchmark is having the mapping to the latest one. So earlier it was CIS Control 7.1 in there, and now CIS Controls 8 has come. And then there are some revisions in NIST as well, so they are also included in here. Right. So how much things you have to think about when securing things? You can look at the available options here. The Microsoft Security Reference Architectures available, the capabilities are there, and the people, how they have to how roles and responsibilities evolving with cloud and zero trust. And then the zero trust access, how to validate trust use over device for all resources, and the Azure native controls, multi-cloud and cross-platform, attack chain coverage, and Azure Access Service Edge, operational technology, and the security operations. So all these options are very well in detail explained, and you can just go to this aka.ms/mcra and browse them. Right. So as I earlier said, there are 12 different security controls, starting with the network security and the identity management, privileged access, data protection, asset management, login and threat detection, incident response, post and vulnerability management, endpoint security, backup and recovery, DevOps security, governance and strategy. And each of these has a code. It's mostly 2 digits. Yeah, yeah, it's always it's 2 digits. So and then there's a tag to each of the security control in there as well. So how does the Azure Security Benchmark recommendations fall in? And each recommendation includes following information: Azure Security Benchmark ID. So the Azure Security Benchmark ID that corresponds to the recommendation, and the CIS controls, and V8 7.1, and the PCI NIST, we saw them. And then the security principle and Azure guidance, we saw them as well in detail. And then implementation and additional context that you might need for any additional work. And then the customer security stakeholders, the security functions at the customer organization, who may be accountable and responsible or consultant for the respective control. So those information are very in detail in the Azure Security Benchmark. Right. So we saw it in the demonstration before. And now let's look at the second part, which is the services baseline. Now, what is a service baseline? For example, if you have if you look at one resource, maybe web application, API management service, something like that, then not every control that we saw in this section, every guideline within the control might be relevant for here. For example, for web application, there might be 3 network controls, and for the Azure API IAM, there might be 2. So they do differ based on the specific service. So that specific service and how they are applicable for that service baseline are defined in the service baselines. Now each recommendation includes following information: an Azure ID, so Azure Security Benchmark ID that corresponds to the recommendation, and the recommendation in detail, then guidance, responsibility, and the Microsoft Defender for cloud monitoring, whether it can be used or not, information like that. Yeah, so let's look at that and see how it works. Now if we go here, we were there in the security controls, and then this v1 v2 are also there. You can just look at them as well, uh, but the latest one is the security controls v3, but there might be organizations who are still on v1 or v2. And then the security baselines are available for Azure, it says, and then the compute options. Now if you look at compute, you can see a different set of guidelines are available here for each of the recommendation check. And if you go to Windows, yeah, that also available here, how the personalization and everything is working. Right, let me go back to the compute part, and let's go to the Azure part. So what it does is, let me collapse this, and if you look at one of these, now I am coming to the Azure Security Baseline for API management. Now we had those options there. We had 12, and we can see the network security, logging and monitoring. All these sections are here. We can see which ones are applicable for here, right? So for example, the 1.1, 1.2, and there are some. Let's go to something simpler, like network security. So if we just come here, starting with the network security, or let's go with data protection. Right. So if you go to data protection, you can see the maintain an inventory of sensitive information, isolate system storing or processing information. So all these particular into app services, which is the most common one if you talk about Azure that's being used. And you can see all the encrypt TLS 1.2 to be used, because they are now going to retire TLS 1.1 and TLS 1. So that's there. And use Active Directory tool to identify sensitive data, and then use Azure RBAC control access access to resources, so you are using the least privilege allowed via the Azure role-based access control. And then the encrypt sensitive information at rest, and log and alert on changes and critical Azure resources. So as you can see, we have a few and we have some missing. Now if we go here, we have 4.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 4.7 is missing, because that's not relevant. That's why it's not available here. And if we go to something like Azure Public IP, as you can see, the number of sections available for Azure Public IP is much limited than the others. So the network security is there, and it's starting from 1.10, and likewise it goes on. So what happens is, all these guidelines that are in CIS, NIST, and PCI-DSS are mapped to a NS. In network security, it's starting with NS code, and then in for each of the Azure service, you can just see which are applicable for it and which can be used in here. As you can see, the network security has only one recommendation here, and login and monitoring has a few, identity and access control has few. So likewise, everything is very well described in here, so it's very easy to manage it. So that's how it works, and you can actually browse through and see any of the Azure services, like even Azure Cosmos DB, how they are available here. So it's very interesting, and I think what really needs to happen is, if you are an organization who is not sure how do you should definitely secure your resources, this is the single point you need to just come and see how you are doing it and how you need to change your resource management out there. And what makes it easy is, if you're using Azure Blueprints, which is still on preview, but you can apply these policies with the ARM templates, and it can be very much simplified and can be used to a very great effect, right? So that was it about what to be spoken here. And so we went through Azure Service Controls and Service Baselines and all the available options. So if you have any questions, just feel free to send me an email or on Twitter. Right. Thank you very much.